Whether you are a veteran of the TCG tables or brand new to the wide world of card games, understanding the details of a new card game can be a daunting task. Lucky for you, Ready Set Draw is here to guide you. Welcome to Episode 3 of Lorcana Lessons. Now that we've explained the card types in Lorcana, let's build a deck so we can play some games. In order to do that, we need to lay out the ground rules of what makes up a Lorcana deck, and give you some tips to make sure it works. There are only 3 rules when building a Lorcana deck. First, your deck must contain at least 60 cards. It's worth noting that playing more than 60 cards will just result in you drawing the cards you want less often when you want them. More cards means more randomness. Second, you cannot play more than 4 copies of a specific card. Notice that the rule specifies card, not character. If you want to play 4 Maleficent Biding Her Time and 4 Maleficent Sorceress, then go for it. The third limitation is that you can only use 1 or 2 ink types when selecting cards for your deck. So, if you include the option to only play 1 type of ink, you have upwards of 21 different ink choices for you to build. With so many options, it may be difficult to narrow down what's best for the deck you want to put together. With that in mind, let's explore what each type of ink brings to the table. The Disney Lorcana website has some wonderful brief descriptions of the inks, but we think we can help put them in a better deck building context for you here. In alphabetical order, first up we have Amber. Amber is the ink of character synergies. Whether it's from drawing cards by playing certain characters with Stitch Rockstar, or getting to ready certain characters in play with Moana, Amber cares about having a large board presence and maintaining it when possible. Next up, we have Amethyst. Amethyst is the ink of ability synergies. With cards like Mickey Mouse Wayward Sorcerer and his Broom Brigade, Elsa Snow Queen, and Pascal, Amethyst showcases that it cares about getting a big return on the investment for the ink you spend on these characters. After Amethyst comes Emerald. Emerald is the ink of flexibility and creating tough choices for your opponent. Cards in Emerald like Cruella de Vil and Cheshire Cat can force your opponent to lose their characters or watch you quest your way to victory. Emerald also utilizes the Reckless mechanic on its cards, taking away opponents' choices and giving you flexibility in how you deal with their characters. Next up is Ruby. Ruby is the ink known for its heavy hitters, with some of the most expensive but explosive glimmers in the game. Characters like Aladdin Heroic Outlaw, Mickey Mouse Brave Little Tailor, and Maleficent Monstrous Dragon show that Ruby wants to make sure it goes big before it goes home. After Ruby, we have Sapphire. Sapphire is the ink all about clever strategy. It can offer more ink than usual with One Jump Ahead and Mickey Mouse Detective. It can offer board-wide protection with Aurora Dreaming Guardian, or versatile removal with cards like Let It Go. Sapphire seeks to have the right strategy for any matchup. Finally, we have Steel. Steel is the ink of aggression by any means necessary. Steel has strong and efficient cards like Captain Hook Forceful Duelist and Fire the Cannons. But it's also home to ways that make that aggression stick around, with bodyguards and heavier removal. Okay, so let's start off with an example deck to move us forward. For the next sections of advice, we'll assume we are building an Amethyst Steel deck. Now that we chose our inks, how do we pick the right mix of 60 cards? The general rule of thumb for building a functioning Lorcana deck is to have a plan for each stage of the game, whether it's the beginning, middle, or end of the game, and then filling it with cards to make that plan happen. With this Amethyst Steel deck, our plan is to be aggressive, but to also have some protection for our characters with really important abilities. If we fill our deck with only low-cost cards, we will play all of them early on and run out of cards pretty quickly. While it might overwhelm our opponent early on, their cards in the middle of the game will be able to handle our smaller characters pretty easily. But if we only plan for big plays in the end of the game, we might not have enough to do in the beginning of the game, resulting in the opponent going uncontested while they march to victory. The sweet spot we are looking for in deck building is to have a good curve. Many deck building websites will show you your deck's card costs in a table like this. And ideally, the deck should have a nice curve with some interaction in the low cost range, a majority in the moderate cost range, and some cards to play in the high cost range. For most decks, the curve will peak in the middle, where your average card costs. If our curve is too high, we run the risk of cards just sitting in our hand because they cost too much. If our curve is too low, we risk our cards being less impactful than the threats our opponent is throwing down in the later turns. Having a balanced curve to our deck helps make it so the majority of cards we draw as the game develops will be playable when we draw them, and have a strong impact on the game. Keep in mind though that this is a general rule for deck building, and some more aggressive or slower strategies will have their own curve preferences. So what else should we keep in mind while choosing cards other than the curve? Cards that cannot be played as ink are generally pretty powerful for their cost. They are fairly formidable for their lack of flexibility. The issue with filling your deck up with a high number of these cards, though, is that they are useless without the ink to play them. So if you draw a Hades King of Olympus before you have 8 ink or 6 ink and another Hades already on board, then I hope you have other options, because until you can pay for him, he won't just be sitting on that throne. He'll be sitting in your hand. Generally speaking, it's fairly safe to include roughly 10 cards that can't be played as ink without messing up your game plan, since the mass majority of your deck is filled with cards that can give you the 1 ink per turn you need. It's also worth considering that if you have plenty of effects that draw more cards in your deck, you can safely bump up that Un-Inkable number a little bit, since you will naturally see more cards and have more options. Hopefully this Lorcana lesson gave you the knowledge to build a Lorcana deck that works like you want it to. And remember, there is no wrong answer for what makes up your Lorcana deck, as long as it fits in the rules and you are having fun. If you think we did a good job of explaining this process, then feel free to share this video with someone who you think may need the lesson themselves. If you enjoy this content and would like more, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you'll be notified when we upload. We're looking forward to seeing you in episode 4, but until then, this has been Jacob from Ready Set Draw. Class dismissed.